Good afternoon, biology class. Today we're going to be talking about ecology or ecological succession and, of course, man's role. So let's jump right into it. Now, we've been talking about ecology for a while now. We talked about the biomes. We talked about all kinds of other different things. But now we're going from there and we're going into something a little more different. So let's see here. Now, we're going to talk about this idea of pioneer species. And a pioneer species is very, very important to making sure that everything goes the way it's supposed to. So let's look here. It says, after terrible natural disasters, an ecosystem can be completely changed. This is very true. More often than not, this change is completely barren, wasteland-like scenarios. There's, for example, volcanoes. After a volcano goes and completely destroys a small island or something like that, it is very difficult for you to do anything with the soil. The soil is basically garbage, and on top of that, there's a lot of other things wrong with it. And so, the first species that actually come back are called these pioneer species, very similar to the pioneers that, went all over America and making new towns and different places like that. These pioneer species are the first species that come back after a huge disaster in an ecosystem, no matter what it might be. And they're very important because they have different roles that they need to play. Now, these species, or this species, make way for other species to come back by making the soil hospitable and providing homes for different smaller insects and things like that. And so, four of the main pioneer species we see at the bottom. You have the lichens, we have the mosses, we have the grass, and we have a mix. And the mix is basically a mix of mosses, lichens, and grass and things like that. Basically just green stuff that grows on what used to be horrible soil. Now, the job of all of these guys here is to basically make the soil better so that we can get our old ecosystem back. Let's go on to our next thing, and we have what's called ecological succession. And so this idea is very interesting, and basically what it says is over time, the pioneer species finish their job, and other species come in that were there before the disaster. Now, those other species are actually called the climax population, or things like that. Basically, things that were there before. When things are going the way they're supposed to, that's what's there. Now, this process can take anywhere from weeks to even centuries, and so depending on how bad the actual tragedy or disaster was, it could take a very, very long time. Or it could just take a couple of weeks before things actually go over. Now, the process by which the pioneer species are replaced by the more stable climax community is called, once again, ecological succession. Now, I have a little bit of a diagram down here. Now, see if this thing goes away. And you'll start out with the annual plants. Those are the first real pioneer species after you get your mosses and things like that. Then your perennials, then your shrubs, then your softwood trees, and your hardwood trees from there. Now, there are two stages that we're going to talk about when it comes to succession. And the first one that you can see here is what we call primary succession. Now, in the Bahamas, we don't go to elementary school, we go to primary school. And primary school is the name we give for the first grades that you go into. And so primary succession is the first form of this succession, or the first part of it. Now, this succession starts with barren wasteland type conditions, no plants and no animals basically. And so after this horrible scenario and most everything is wiped out, that's when we start our primary succession. Now, sometimes you can look out and there can be a little bit of vegetation or maybe a little bit of animals that were there, but those may eventually die out due to the conditions around them. And so this area that's been struck with this horrible disaster starts out with basically nothing and has to work its way back up. Oftentimes, your first responders tend to be producers, and so the first things that come back during primary succession are usually some type of plant, or in even certain cases, an algae. might be the first thing to come back. And those things really come along and they help to do a lot of really cool stuff. Now, at this point, the soil needs to be enriched. That's the main purpose of these this whole primary succession section of this. You need to enrich the soil so that bigger and better plants and animals can come to wherever this has happened. Now, there's a story about Krakatoa, which is an actual volcano that happened, that erupted in Indonesia. And it was a really, really serious eruption. The tsunami from it caused more than 35,000 people to die. And on top of that, the eruption actually clouded so much of the atmosphere near Europe. It's said that Europe had no sunlight whatsoever for 3 years. And this is a real thing that happened back in 1883. You think about that. Well, there was no animal life on the island. There was no plant life whatsoever. But 2 years after this happened, there were reports of this blue-green algae and scattered mosses that started to actually enrich the island. And then from there, you start to see more and more things come about. But it was not for those blue-green algae and those mosses and those ferns and things like that started out enriching the soil. There'd be nothing there. So that's your primary succession. Now from there we get to secondary succession, which is basically the next part. And the last part as far as we're going to be concerned today. Now, this takes place after the soil is ready and the pioneers are thriving. And so your pioneer plants, they're doing fantastic. You basically see grass everywhere. You see mosses and lichens and all this stuff just growing all around. Maybe some algae on the shores. It's doing fantastic. Well, at this point, this means that the old vegetation and the old animals can start coming back. This process takes a lot less time than primary succession. So once primary succession is over, secondary succession is usually very quick. It doesn't take a lot of time before you are ready to go and your climax vegetation and your climax habitat is back. So once it's finished, the ecosystem is restored to the way it once was. And so after whatever natural disaster, this is how we say the earth heals itself to a certain extent. This is what it does. And this has been set into motion for a long time. We see this stuff happening almost everywhere where there's been some type of natural disaster that wipes out everything. And it's really cool to see. And it may take a very, very long time, but it does come back usually. Now, this all brings up a lot of stuff. But I just want to point to you at the bottom right of the screen. You can actually see basically how an area goes from being complete barren wasteland, bare rock, to then being able to have trees. Huge trees, in fact. Your climax community. Now, a big part of this is what is man's role in the ecosystem? And so, what are things that we should be concerned about? What can we do and what have we been told to do? Now, the Bible gives us many verses where it talks about our relationship with nature. So let's look at Genesis chapter 1, and you could look at verses 26 and 28, and it basically gives us dominion over the earth. Now, a big thing that I need to talk about that often gets brought up here is this point here. However, just because we have dominion over something doesn't mean we can do whatever we want to it. Now let's think about it this way. Your parents basically have dominion over you, right? Well, that doesn't just mean that your parents can do whatever they want to you, does it? Well, I hope it doesn't, and I hope that isn't what's happening at your homes. But the thing is, when it comes to man's role in the ecosystem, we kind of have to act like the Earth's parents in a certain way, and we need to be doing things to help it out and to make sure that Earth keeps the way it is, because we're going to be the ones that suffer if we don't take care of Earth. There's a lot of crazy stuff that could happen. Now, of course, I believe we should take care of it the best we can. And so that means, along with having dominion over it, we need to make sure that we are doing more to protect it and protect the things that we see. So that means using more renewable resources. That means going around and making sure that we're doing the best that we can and we're not causing havoc. We're not just dumping waste or polluting the areas that we need. And so that will make a happy earth, like we see right down here. And so that's basically where I want to end. Oh, look. Oh boy, I bet you guys love that. Anyway, that's where I want to end my video today. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye.